Our Town. I'm Aaron Motley. Join Our Town brings you information regarding the issues and problems we face in our local communities in hopes of finding some solutions. On the first portion of our program today, we're going to talk about Alabama's economy. Last year, in 2006, the cattle industry took a big hit because of the early drought, and we're here today to talk to Agriculture and Industries Commissioner Ron Sparks, and he's going to tell us about what's on the horizon for Alabama's cattle industry. And we thank you for being with us on the program today.
My pleasure.
And we want to just kind of talk about Alabama's economy overall, but really because of what's happened as far as the beef industry is concerned, we'd like to kind of look at where we stand with that and what happened in 2006.
Well, you hit it right on when you were talking about early on last year with the drought. You know, early on we lost 90% of our corn crop. But when you lose your corn crop, most of the cases you're losing your hay crop.
Yeah.
And when you have to start feeding hay that early on, what that means is that most producers are going to start culling their cattle. So we've sold a lot more cattle, younger cattle, last year than we did this year. Not only that, they wasn't able to put hay up for the future. So this winter could really be a telltale story of how it's going to affect our cattle industry. We're very much concerned about it because there's not any hay anywhere. And if you don't have the ability to feed them, you're going to sell them. And the main thing that we want to be able to do is try to help them make sure they maintain their brood herds. You know, the brood herds is like your industry. That's your business.
Okay.
And if you have to start selling those brood herds off, it's hard to build them back. So we have sold probably considerably more cattle this year than we did the year before.
Okay. How important is the beef industry in Alabama overall?
Well, it's extremely important. Our beef industry here is about 14th in the nation. We're beef producers. We got a lot of cattle, probably 1.5 million head of cattle in the state of Alabama. So it's extremely important that we protect our cattle industry from animal health issues. But when you have these unfortunate situations such as the drought, then you have to look at alternative feed sources, supplemental sources, and it's been a trying year, I would say, for our cattle industry overall.
Okay, so talk a little bit more about those alternative feed sources and where can we get them? Can we get them, and what are they?
Well, normally you can get them because usually in a drought you have neighboring states or in the same areas that possibly didn't have the drought, and you could transfer those in. That was the problem this year. Even in the Midwest, the corn gluten, soybean hulls and alternative sources of feed was much more to get. It was much more difficult to get these products in here. And even hay products. I mean, there was just not any hay from the surrounding areas of our state that we could bring in. If you remember back in 2000, we had what we call a hay lift from North Alabama to South Alabama because North Alabama got plenty of rain, South Alabama didn't. We moved over 20,000 rows of hay from farmers from North Alabama to South Alabama. Well, that helped the farmers sustain their herds. We haven't had the luxury of having that this year. We've had a drought all across Alabama, so it's affected our cattle industry. You know, and certainly I'm concerned about it, and hopefully we have a better year next year.
Okay. Well, what then does this mean for the consumer? As far as, because you know that it brings in quite a bit of revenue in the state of Alabama, and if we have another year this year similar to last year, or just because of what's happened in 2006, it's going to affect the consumer.
Well, I think early on it would probably be in the positive for the consumer because you're going to flood the markets with beef, and probably prices could stay stable or even go down. But I think later on in production, when those markets are gone, it could have an effect on the consumer. It could have an effect on the price, and the price of beef could begin to go higher. So, you know, we like to see it stay pretty well leveled out. We like to see good years to where farmers can have a normal year of culling and moving on, but this wasn't that year. So I would say early on, you could possibly see some positive for the consumer because we've sold so many cattle, flood the market. But after that, when that's gone, then you could definitely see an impact.
What we're really hoping for then is this year could be a turnaround as far as the weather is concerned.
No doubt about it. You know, and farmers need that. I mean, we've had a few good years in the past But with the opportunities of corn, the prices of corn have gone up. You know, possibly the prices of soybeans have gone up. Looking at the future of alternative fuels, maybe using the corn, soybean, cotton seeds, peanut oil. I believe that's the future. I believe that agriculture is going to play a major role in seeing this country become less dependent of foreign oils. And I believe Alabama can play a major role. Look at our cellulose in Alabama. Alabama's #2 in the nation in wood production. Well, if we can get our hands around that technology to where we can make ethanol from wood products, what would that do for Alabama? What would it do for Alabama's economy? How many jobs would it create? So there's a lot of things that are laying right out there on the horizon that could be real big for Alabama agriculture.
Does it look like we're moving in that direction?
No doubt.
Are we talking to our legislators? And
yes, we are. If you'll notice, the governor and I came out a week ago and put together a alternative fuel coalition to look at legislation that would benefit Alabama. What type of incentives do we need to lay on the table? Where do we need to put our interest? But you've got to talk to the people that are in the business, people that are in the industry. They got to have input in what type of legislation you put together. And it just goes to show that there are issues that are important enough that the commissioner and the governor needs to take partisan politics, lay it aside, and do what's good for the people of Alabama. And I think that's exactly what we've done on this alternative fuel issue. Now we've got to come with a package and go to the legislature and make something happen.
Okay, so that could be a possible future right there. And
no doubt about it, because, I mean, look at the Midwest. I mean, look at the corn. I mean, they've been very successful with their corn and their soybeans, but we got to remember, there's a difference in the Midwest and Alabama. Alabama's a meat-producing state. Poultry, for an example. We produce over 1 billion birds a year in Alabama. They eat corn. And we gotta make sure that we use the technology that when we use these grains for an alternative fuel source, then we need to turn around and use the distiller's grains as a food source for our poultry industry. So we've got to keep all of these things on our radar. We can't go out and use all the technology we got to save a nickel on gasoline and raise the price of food $1. So the agriculture business right now is a very serious business, and but I tell you, I had an opportunity to speak to some students all across the southeastern United States today, and I told them agriculture is at the point right now that is bright because of the alternative fuels. You know, our farmers have always produced the safest, most economical food supply in the world. And anybody that's never been to a country that don't produce their food supply don't realize how fortunate we are to have farmers. I guarantee you, somebody in your family was a farmer.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it. And we just need to give those farmers the credit that they deserve. The commitments that they've made to our environment, the commitments they've made to feed the families across, the commitments they've made, but now they're making another commitment. They've been producing the food and fiber, now they're going to produce the fuel. So I'm very proud to be the agriculture in Alabama at this point in time.
Well, I tell you, you seem to be, and in such a time as this, seems to be right on cutting edge of things. And what assistance are we getting from the federal government? Are we seeing getting some support there?
Yes, we are. And you know, the president has made an alternative fuel initiative, giving credits from the federal government. But also, this is the year of the '07 Farm Bill. And I just got back from Washington last week working on the '07 Farm Bill. And I think what we put together can really carve the way, the future of how agriculture in this country exists. And I think we've got to come with a good farm bill. Not so that we call it farm handouts or farmers just want to be able to survive. And as long as they have good weather, they will survive. But when they have disasters, we need, in my opinion, we need to prop them up. We need to make sure that farmers have an opportunity to continue. Because one statistic that I just want to leave with you, back in the 50s and 60s in Alabama, we had over 250,000 family farms. Today, our records show that we have less than 45,000 family farms. In the 50s and 60s, we farmed over 20 million acres. Today, we farm 9 million acres. Farmers are having to use the technology to produce more with less.
And what does that mean then when we're having to depend more on the professional farmers rather than to, folks who just have their own little independent farms out
Well, the little independent farms are, in my opinion, are extremely important. And I think those are the ones that back up, they're the backbone, and they keep the bigger farmers in operation as far as I'm concerned. We live in a global world today. Not only do farmers just feed the people of Alabama and the United States, we feed the world.
Yeah.
And we're in a global economy. And those are the issues that we have on the table, is that our farmers have always stepped up to the occasion of whatever is laid on them, the responsibilities, whether it's stronger regulations, they've lived up to it. Protecting the environment, they've lived up to it. Producing the food, the fiber, farmers, in my opinion, are heroes. And in the day's age now, I don't know if everybody's like me, but when I walk through an airport and I see a guy that's in a military uniform, I walk up to him and say thank you. That's what we also need to do to farmers.
Yeah.
Is say thank you for the commitments that you've made.
Those unsung heroes.
Those unsung heroes. And we need to make those commitments, because I'm going to tell you, my family and your family made an important commitment. Not only that, nutrition is becoming a very important issue.
Absolutely.
We are now taking more agricultural products, feeding our school children in our schools, so that they grow up and be healthy and productive young men and women.
And less dependent on processed.
No doubt about it. There's just all kinds of things. But it's an exciting time to be the Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Alabama.
Okay, and what do you see overall for the economy in Alabama as far as the agriculture is concerned?
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited. I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think we're at the crossroads that says there's a lot of future out there, and that's what I told the young people this morning. Yeah. Whether it's in technology, or whether you're a producer, or whether you're whatever you may be in the segment of agriculture, I think there's a great opportunity. Animal health is extremely important, and I think there's a lot of opportunities in agriculture. But the biggest thing in agriculture is this: there's one key word: profitability. If a farmer can't make a living, he ain't going to stay in agriculture very long.
Okay. Well, Commissioner, we thank you for being with us on this portion of the program. We're out of time, and we thank you for all of the valuable information that you shared with us on this morning.
It's my pleasure.
Okay. Well, stay awake for the next segment of Joy in Our Town. We're going to be talking about sleep abnormality after this. Welcome back to this second portion of Joy in Our Town, and we are still discussing health. We have with us Michael Dodd, and he is the Sleep Services Coordinator with Baptist Health. He's here today to talk to us about various sleep disorders affecting many local residents. Problems such as sleep apnea, insomnia, and snoring are making a good night's sleep seem more like an impossible dream for many people. We thank you for being with us on the program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I see that there's more and more of a need for sleep centers, and people are doing all kinds of research on sleep abnormalities, and so we're finding that this is a very, very serious matter. So I'd like to start off by talking about sleep apnea and what it is. How do you define sleep apnea?
Well, sleep apnea is, of course, when you fall asleep, typically what happens is your airway collapses. And when that collapse happens, you're unable to get oxygen into your lungs, and of course, you're unable to get oxygen into your brain. Your body basically is suffocating. Your brain realizes that, wakes you up, you start breathing normally again, and that process begins to happen over and over and over as many as...
I have to interrupt
here
now.
Sure.
Now, you say that your airway just collapses.
Yes.
Now, why does this happen while you're asleep rather than while you're awake?
That's a great question. When you're awake, just like with other muscles of your body, they're tight and toned. Well, when you fall asleep, as a part of the normal sleep process, your muscles relax. Well, that includes the muscles in your throat that help hold your airway open. So when those muscles begin to relax and you start breathing, you put pressure on those muscles and they vibrate. That's what causes snore, or that's the sound of snoring. And then eventually they can completely collapse together, and that's when you get that obstructive portion of the sleep apnea.
Okay, I know there's one more that you're going to mention, but who are the kind of people that this is happening to?
We're finding more and more that it affects a much broader base of population. Typically, when we first started looking at sleep disorders, we felt it was middle-aged, overweight men that was the problem. But we're finding more and more that women have sleep apnea, especially postmenopausal women can have it just as great as the middle-aged, overweight man. Certainly, obesity plays a role in it. The tonsils, adenoids, your actual structure of your throat can play a part in it. That's why we sometimes see children actually having sleep apnea, because they may have big tonsils and adenoids that actually obstruct the airway as well. And of course, childhood obesity is a huge problem in our nation, and we're finding more and more children actually having sleep apnea.
So we're really seeing that this is stemming from other health issues, right?
It can, absolutely. But then again, we see people that are certainly my size or smaller that have sleep apnea as well. So it's not just obesity and those kind of things. Sometimes you just have it and you would never know it.
Well, you know it if somebody tells you you're snoring.
And that's typically where we get our referrals from. It's a bed partner saying, I can't sleep with this person anymore. Their snoring is so loud, it's so distracting to me. That's usually where we get our referrals from, is the bed partners. So the snoring definitely plays the biggest part in it.
So should we just say that, well, a person who's snoring, that's a dangerous health problem there? I mean, can we just look at that as something that is dangerous and not just something to laugh at? Because a lot of folks have, over the years, and I think we've all done it, just hearing somebody snoring, and we just thought it was funny.
Absolutely.
And so now we need to look at it as a serious health problem.
Absolutely. Snoring is definitely the biggest indicator that there's a problem. There are cases of just primary snoring, where it's just snoring and there isn't that obstruction of the airway. But more often than not, if you're snoring, your airway is collapsed, whether it be completely or partially. The sound of snoring is a collapsed airway. So absolutely, if somebody's snoring, and then especially if they have the other symptoms, like they're waking up still tired, they're excessively sleepy during the day. If you have those parts of it with the snoring, absolutely there's a problem.
Wow. Now, can we look at something as like light snoring as opposed to this heavy snoring? There's more of a collapse in the airway when there's the heavy snoring.
That's typically that's typically factual. That the louder the snoring, probably the worse the problem is. And not only the snoring, if patients are experiencing when they're snoring and then they stop snoring and then they start snoring again, that's a huge indicator, because typically during that silent part, that's when the airway has actually completely collapsed and they're just struggling to breathe, and then eventually the body wakes up and they begin snoring again. So it's actually the pauses in the snoring that can really be that big indicator that there's been an obstructive.
Because that person has actually stopped breathing.
Absolutely. Well, they're trying to breathe, but their airway has collapsed and they can't get air past it.
Okay.
So they're struggling to breathe.
So that's the real dangerous part.
Absolutely.
Would it be advisable for someone that's in the room who's awake to try to wake that person up?
We get a lot of spouses that tell us that's what they have to do constantly during the night. For the most part, your body's going to respond to that and realize there's a problem and eventually wake you up. That's the hope anyway. I'm sure there are cases of patients that eventually don't wake up.
But y'all don't have any statistics as far as how many people, especially in our area, that has actually died in their sleep because of this particular problem?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know of any statistics out there, but there is certainly that link, because even within the Sleep Disorder Center, we see people having these obstructive apneas, and at the end of those events, their heart will stop. It will actually stop beating.
Wow.
Luckily, when they get aroused out of that event, their heart starts back. But I'm sure that there are cases that the heart just didn't start back and they actually died. So sure, it can be a huge problem.
Now, you talked about there are two areas. There's the sleep obstruction there, and then there's another disorder that is a part of sleep apnea when the brain just does not tell the body to breathe, or something along that line.
Right. There are people that have what we call central sleep apnea.
Okay.
And that is typically that you see that more in people that have had strokes.
Okay.
Any kind of damage to the brain stem, because that's where the brain stem is where it tells the body to breathe. In some instances, you just don't get that connection between the two, so you'll have these long pauses of breathing during sleep. So we do see that's not quite as prevalent as obstructive sleep apnea, but it does exist, absolutely.
Okay, and that usually, like you said, is something that happens after a person's had a stroke or some other problem along that line.
Brain injury.
What would be a percentage of people who are experiencing sleep apnea?
Well, from the National Sleep Foundation did a study recently, and as many as 18 to 20 million people in the United States suffer from some form of obstructive sleep apnea. So, and most of those go undiagnosed and untreated. So it's a huge problem.
Have y'all done any studies or surveys for this local area?
We have not done any local studies, but just from a personal experience, I've been in sleep disorders medicine since 1998, and I kept thinking we were eventually going to see everybody with sleep apnea, and we constantly continue to have people. So it's an enormous problem. It's an enormous problem.
Okay. So and wouldn't you say it's a big problem? What again is it leading to? Is this leading to someone's death? I mean, it would come out of that. I mean, is it linked to something such as SIDS, for instance?
Not necessarily SIDS. The studies, for the most part, don't really show a link between sleep apnea and SIDS. SIDS in an infant, typically the brain sometimes just isn't developed enough to really tell it to breathe sometimes, or sometimes they've rolled over and they re-breathe CO2, which can lead to the brain not telling the body to breathe. So there's really not that link between obstructive sleep apnea and SIDS. There is a huge link, however, between obstructive sleep apnea, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, stroke, lots of health issues related to sleep apnea. One Swedish study that they did last year showed that people with sleep apnea had a quintupled evidence of having cardiovascular disease if they had sleep apnea, and 2/3 of those people, if treated, didn't die of cardiovascular disease. So that link is huge.
Okay. We want to look at also insomnia, and we see that also as a sleep disorder.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When people can't sleep.
Yeah. When I'm out doing health fairs and things.
Yeah, real quick, what are some of the reasons why people can't sleep?
There are tons of different reasons. Usually the biggest one is stress. Stress, of course, leads to you ruminating at night and thinking so much that you just can't fall asleep. There are physiological factors. As we get older, we have more aches and pains. Those kind of things lead to insomnia. And we do have a clinical psychologist on staff with the Sleep Disorder Center that can help people with true insomnia. They can teach them relaxation techniques and different things to help them manage their insomnia.
Okay. With insomnia or sleep apnea, maybe you can give us some suggestions or techniques to, as far as falling asleep. Let's look at that first. Maybe some techniques to help people to fall asleep.
Okay. Absolutely. One of the big things we try to teach within the Sleep Disorder Center is good sleep hygiene. And that's not a word that a lot of people are familiar with. But good sleep hygiene are just techniques that you use that you should practice on a nightly basis to make sure you're falling asleep appropriately. The biggest thing as far as sleep hygiene goes is people watching TV at night. I have many people come through the sleep center and say, I just can't fall asleep without my TV on. Unfortunately, that's not good sleep hygiene because the TV has many different volume levels during the night, and it will cause the body to have microarousals. It causes sleep disruption. So sleeping without the TV on, definitely a big one.